Bezat Hashem, we're continuing on from where we left off yesterday in the introduction to Mesilat Yesharim. So we finished off yesterday. We just started, the Ramchal began to introduce his Sefer and his Hakdama. So let's just remember where we left off. We were saying, Tochal, b'vakasha. Okay, tevarech. Shakon yeh b'varo. Shakon yeh b'varo. Amen. Okay, so we finished off yesterday. The Ramchal told us, that this Sefer that he wrote, let's just go through the main points. He said most of the things you're going to read are things that you know. The purpose of it is to remind us of those things that we naturally forget. And he told us that there is this idea of what we call shleimut avoda, or chasidut as he calls it, which encompasses Yirat Hashem, Ahavat Hashem, Dvekut B'Hashem, Taharat HaLev, all kinds of different, obviously very important things. And he said, unfortunately, what ends up happening is, the Chachamim don't study this. So what ends up happening is, it's the less intelligent people that study these things. And that's exactly where we left off. So the Ramchal continues now and he says like this, V'ulam, however, the outcome of this reality is negative for the wise people and the not so wise people. Because it causes that both groups, the wise men and the not such wise men, will be lacking in this real understanding, and it'll be difficult to find any real idea of shleimut avoda in the world. It'll be lacking from the wise people, meaning because they don't study it and they don't analyze it. And then the others who do study it don't really understand what they're learning. So therefore they're also going to be lacking in this department. This is unbelievable what he's about to say here. And I think, unfortunately, today it's a lot of truth to this too. Until it appears to most people that Chasidut is dependent on what he's about to describe are superficial actions. Saying a lot of Tehillim, which is not a bad thing, but it's only that. And that's not, for sure not. Uviduyim arukim me'od, and long confessions. Tzomot kashim, harsh fasts. Utfilot kerach v'sheleg, and jumping into the snow for mikveh. Kulam dvarim asher ein hasechel nach bahem ve'ein hadat shoketa. These are all things that we don't appreciate in our minds. This is not appreciated things. Oh. He's neged superficial actions. That means outside actions that are not really development. Exactly. V'chasidut amiti, and real chasidut. And I pointed this out yesterday. It's very important to note when we talk about chasidut. He wrote this, whatever it was, like 400 years ago, whatever it was. He's not talking about when people today call themselves chasidim. They might be included in chasidut, but just because they wore the hat and the peyot or whatever, that's not what we're talking about in the Gemara and what the Ramchal talks about. Chasidut. Chasidut is a high way to live. It's a lofty lifestyle. It's a not just superficial development. What? Exactly. So that's what is it? That's really desirable. It's very far from this picture in our minds. All those things we just described. Because there's an obvious statement, which is something that doesn't sit comfortably in my mind. I push it out of my mind. So if I look at something as ridiculous, or I look at something as unenjoyable or as far out, I'm not going to develop in that area. Even though it's already been established in the hearts of every straight person, every person with a correct head, the beginnings of these ideas, but if he does not engage in them, he'll see the details, he won't recognize them. He'll transgress them, and he won't really feel them. What he's about to explain to us is that these ideas of Chasidut, again we say Yirat Hashem, Ahavat Hashem, these ideas, these are not things that come naturally to a person necessarily like other natural tenuot, like other natural things. Explains like this. Re'eh, see. These types of things of Chassidut, awe of Hashem, love of Hashem, purity of the heart, dvarim mutba'im ba'adam. These are not things that are completely natural to a person. That you don't need sorts of methods to acquire them. Like other things that don't require ways of acquisition. For example, tiredness and waking up. Meaning that the pshat is, when you're tired, you're tired. You don't work it. You're tired at the end of the day. In the morning you wake up, Baruch Hashem, we wake up. Those aren't things you work for necessarily. It's just a natural reality. Hara'av v'asava. Being hungry and being satiated. Again, you don't work for that. There's no necessary way to accomplish that. When you eat, you're full. When you don't eat, you're hungry. It's just a natural feeling. Other things that are carved into our nature. This Chassidut is not like that. There needs to be an approach, a strategy, methods of accomplishing these Chassidut. And also, there's no shortage of distancers in this world, things that push these ideas away from us. It means naturally in the reality of the world, there are things that push us away from Ahavat Hashem, away from Yirat Hashem, away from Taharat HaLev. And also, there's no shortage of ways to distance ourselves from those ways that distance us from Ahavat Hashem, etc. So in Kenya says, once we understand that, how could we not invest a specific time in our day, a particular time in our day, to focus on what are these things and how do we acquire them? How will a person develop this wisdom if he does not seek it out? Meaning what he's pointing out to us is clearly these require focus. To really understand Ahavat Hashem, we have to invest effort. What's that?
Like you have to...
Bikush.
Yeah. הוא לא מקבל את זה, הוא צריך ללמוד את זה.
Exactly. It requires effort. That's right. Involvement, focus.
Why you can't love Hashem without learning anything?
You could, but you'll only love on a very, very basic level. That's the point that he's saying. Very basic. Because to really develop, that's really the nekuda that he's focused on over here. Because we understand that these things are so obvious, very often we don't invest time to develop them. And then we're lacking the real sophistication. Oh, Baruch Hashem. Beautiful. So that's why he wrote this whole sefer, which is working on our midot, so that we could really develop Ahavat Hashem, really develop Yirat Hashem, Tvekut B'Hashem, Taharat HaLev, Halicha B'Drachav, all of the things that we know we have to do. We know that we even do them to a basic degree. But if we really want to develop in these things, it requires real study. And implementation, obviously. Let's continue a little more here. Once it becomes clear to any wise person the need for complete service of Hashem and the purity of our the obligation to purify ourselves, to improve, because without this, as the Mefarshim explain in the bottom here, we're not serving Hashem in the highest level at all. But rather what we're doing has a very negative connotation to it. Hashem knows exactly what we're thinking. We could pretend to be doing something, we could even fool ourselves perhaps, but we can't fool Hashem. He knows where our head's at. What are we going to answer after 120? On the day of rebuke, and instead we put aside, on that day ultimately, that's something that's so important to us, to develop, something that really is so important, to develop our relationship with Hashem. Is it possible that a person invests so much energy in searching for things that he's not even obligated, or trying to understand things that he's not mechuyav to understand. In analysis that doesn't produce anything. And rules that have nothing to do with us. And what we have a real obligation to Hashem, we leave it to just our normal behavior, and just like what we were trained from our childhood, chas v'shalom, those are things we actually have to focus on and develop in a serious way.
Which one? The one that we have nothing to do with?
No, the Chassidut, these avodah shleimut.
The Chassidut that you have to do.
I already told you. Avat Hashem, Avat Hashem, Yirat Hashem, Taharat Alev. These are all things included. Tachlis, shleimut avodah. That's the way he calls it. Total service of Hashem.
Total service, you gotta go to Torah 24 hours a day.
No. Total service means the entirety of our development in our relationship with Hashem. Maybe? You just said the good example. Avat Hashem. What can you develop in Avat Hashem? Hagufa, that's a good question. But that is coming from the angle that Avat Hashem is a very shallow thing. Simplistic thing.
No, it's natural.
But it's not simplistic. It's not. That's the point. Okay. But that's the point.
How could I love Hashem more than what I love Him now?
So you want me to tell you the whole Sefer in 1 second, but we're not doing that because that's exactly the point. It's a process of development, which means we work on our midot and we improve ourselves, as is the way of any development. You don't improve yourself in 1 second. It doesn't work that way. That's the whole process, exactly. Of course.
עכשיו אני רוצה הוכחה שבן אדם באמת עושה. לא שהוכיח לי.
אני מסכים.
שאנשים הוכיחו לי לפני שנים.
שהם אהבו את השם?
לא אגיד רק את השם, גם את הדת.
אוקיי.
הם עלו על המוקד, הם נשרפו, ולא שינו דעתם. היום אני לא מאמין אני אמצא אנשים כאלה.
שומע.
תשמע,
זה לא ירידת הדורות, נו.
כמו בזמן האינקוויזיציה בספרד. אנשים נשרפו, נטלו, נטענו.
זה העניין של ירידת הדורות. Unfortunately, that's the Mesilat. כן. Okay. But we can still work. Still try to get there.
אפילו לא יגיד על ספרד, יגיד על השואה.
No. Many examples throughout history. Unfortunately, a lot of examples.
Right.
It's okay, Obased. Let's go a little bit ahead and we'll stop in 2 minutes here. If we don't analyze and investigate what is real awe of Hashem, what is yirah amitit, and what are the branches, means what are the elements of it? How will we acquire it? And how will we avoid the foolishness of the world that causes us to forget what is yirat Hashem? We'll forget and just continue on with our lives, even though we know our chova. Similarly with Avat Hashem. If we don't work hard to establish it in our hearts, in all of the methods that we could really acquire it, how will we actually find it within us? How will we find connection and excitement with Hashem? In our souls. And with His Torah, if we don't turn ourselves towards Hashem's greatness and the awe of Hashem, that causes us to have this connection with Hashem. How will we purify our machshavot, our thoughts? If we don't put effort to purify it from the natural realities of this world. All of the midot are like this, the character traits. They require perfection, correction. Who will perfect them and who will straighten them? If we don't focus on them. And we're not focused on this with a great focus. I think we're going to stop here. Zat Hashem will pick up tomorrow. The same topic, basically. Continue on this discussion, God willing. Okay, חבר'ה, יום טוב.
מה שהיום למדנו זה...